Good morning, everybody. Today's lesson is on poetry. What is poetry? What isn't poetry? Listen and consider. Empty room, vacant of people, of thought. Bookshelf untouched, in the dim corner of the dim room. Outside, the trees sway. They too are lonely. When will the silence end? When will the blinds be open and the light shine into the dim room? When will the bookshelf, which sits untouched, finally give forth its light and end the darkness of this dark room? Is that a poem? What do you think? The problem with poetry, as I see it, is that it's really hard in the modern day to tell somebody that no, it's not a poem. We sort of reached a place where everything is art, or you can't say that it's not art. That's my gripe with postmodernism, is the idea that anything can be art. I don't believe that. As somebody who studied poetry at university for 4 years, I simply don't believe that anything can be art. There's a poem that I remember reading in it was a grade 11 university prep textbook when I just started teaching. And I don't remember exactly what the poem is. I couldn't even be bothered to Google it, but it was something along the lines of, I think it was called Juxtaposition. And the poem was something like, I've always wanted to write a poem that included the word juxtaposition, and now I have. The idea being that that itself was a poem. All right, well, consider this. I want to use a metaphor for poetry, an extended metaphor. I want to compare a conversation to, I guess, existence. Not quite existence, but intellectual existence. If our intellectual existence as a species, sort of where civilization started and until now, so we're looking at the last 5,000 years. If our civilization is a conversation, the intellectual part of it, just a conversation passed down from generation to generation and involving different groups of people, as new civilizations formed, they began adding to the conversation. And now we've reached a point where the conversation is a worldwide conversation. What does that add to the conversation? To me, for something to be art, it has to have meaning. It has to add somehow to this conversation. And if it adds nothing, then it is not art. And it's not poetry, if we're looking at poetry specifically. So juxtaposition. I just used the word juxtaposition. What did that add? Did that add anything? I don't think so. And so I don't think it's a poem. And that's the reason why I don't think just anything can be a poem. Now, you don't have to write lyrical poetry for it to be a poem. One of my favorite poems is Self-Pity by D.H. Lawrence. If you haven't heard it, this is it. I never saw a wild thing sorry for itself. A small bird will drop frozen dead from a bough without ever having felt sorry for itself. That's it. That's the poem. It's not an epic poem. It's not Paradise Lost, literally a book length poem. It doesn't rhyme. There's no meter to it. And yet it adds something. It adds this image of a small bird dying without feeling sorry for itself. And then as reader, me anyways, you become convicted in a sense for your feelings of self-pity when life gets hard, right? I often use this, I drop this on my son. He's 10 years old, and he gets into like that mood where he's like really feeling sorry for himself about something, and I drop that on him. And I only like get about halfway through the poem, and he's like, okay, Dad, I get it, sort of thing. Not that I like crush his feelings or anything. I'm not a mean dad. But I think that there's something, even young kids can learn something from poetry. But anyways, that adds something to the conversation. Shakespeare, let's look at Shakespeare. Why is Shakespeare considered to be a great poet? Well, for a lot of reasons, but one of them is he was able to do something beautiful with words. He could say things using beautiful words. So consider Sonnet 18. Clicked on the wrong tab here. Sonnet 18. So he wrote like almost a couple hundred sonnets. Here's one of them. Sonnets being like the most highly structured form of poetry that was ever invented, pretty much. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometimes declines by chance, or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in the shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Beautiful. You don't even have to know what he's saying to know that that's beautiful. He's got the rhythm, and he's got the rhyme. It sounds beautiful. The poet can do that with words. Now, in modern times, we've learned that too much structure hinders what the poet can say, and there has to be a balance. So in modern times, rhyme is sort of like tucked in, and rhythm is sometimes tucked in to poetry. Here's one by T.S. Eliot, who's generally considered to be one of the best poets of the 20th century, if not the best poet of the 20th century, for English anyways. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like tedious argument of insidious intent, to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. Not really beautiful subject matter, wandering through like a dirty, modern era city with sort of like the degeneration that Eliot saw going on and commented on in his poetry. But he tucks in the rhyme, and he tucks in the rhythm, he tucks in like the asanas, the kasanas, like they're in there. So he crafts his work. He doesn't do what I did when I came up with that thing on the spot. The whole thing about the empty room, I was literally just looking around my classroom, and like there's a window here and it's autumn outside and there's a bookshelf in the corner, and you know, I hate fluorescent light. It's sort of like, even though it's bright, it feels dim at the same time. So I was just pretty much rambling, and I added nothing to the conversation of existence. All I did was I rambled about my room. T.S. Eliot adds something to the conversation about existence. The idea of like the modern world is a better world. Well, is it though? When you take a look at, you know, sort of like the way that things sort of, even though they progress, they decay at the same time. The one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, not exactly like what I would call progress. This is what I'm getting at with regards to poetry and what it is that the poet can do both things at the same time. They can say something meaningful, and they can do it in a beautiful way. That's to me what poetry really is. And that is what my challenge is going to be for you in the poetry unit is to learn both of these skills and both of these schools, and then to see if you can combine those two things together in order to write some real poetry. Okay? So that is your introduction to what I think poetry is. Feel free to disagree if you want to. I'll tell you that you're wrong though, but then again, I'm biased. So anyways, with regards to the poetry unit, I'm going to be posting some more videos talking more specifically about the different schools of thought, the idea of making your words beautiful, and the idea of starting with that profound idea that needs to be shared, and then we'll be combining those two things together over the course of this unit. Anyways, have a great day, and if you're still not done with those quizzes on character and setting, make sure you get those done.